Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku became the key to restoring a destroyed multiverse? Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The end of the world did not come with a bang. It came with a sickening, pervasive silence. It began as a wrongness in the air, a discordant note in the symphony of reality that only those with the most sensitive quirks could feel. Then, the silence began to eat the sound. The roar of battle, the desperate screams of civilians, the thunderous clash of power against power, it all became muted, as if being heard through a thick wall of glass. Izuku Midoriya, his body a canvas of agony and raw determination, felt at first as a pressure behind his eyes. He was locked in the final, desperate struggle for his world. Tamura Shigaraki, a walking avatar of decay, was a storm of destruction before him. But behind Shigaraki, behind everything, was the true abyss. He called himself Nexus All for One. He hadn't arrived, he had simply become present. One moment, the sky above the ruined city of Muzidafu was a familiar canvas of smoke and grim twilight. The next, it was fractured. Not like broken glass, but like a concept that had forgotten its own definition. Cracks of pure, utter nothingness snaked across the heavens, and through them, no stars or void of space could be seen, only an emptiness so profound it hurt the soul to look at. This All for One was not the man All Might had fought. He wore a suit of perfect darkness that seemed to drink the light, his face a swirling vortex of stolen visages from 1,000 forgotten worlds. He moved with an impossible grace, not flying, but simply ceasing to be in one place and beginning to be in another. Such a spirited little reality, the being mused, his voice a chorus of 1,000,000 dead souls speaking in unison, yet devoid of any emotion. It echoed not in their ears, but directly within their minds. So much noise. So much redundant complexity. He raised a hand, his fingers long and tapered like a surgeon's. He didn't point at a hero. He pointed at a concept. He pointed at endeavor. The flame hero was a pillar of incandescent rage, a personal sun holding back a tide of Nomu. He unleashed a final, defiant prominence burn, a torrent of white-hot plasma that could sterilize a city block. The beam of fire raced towards Nexus All for One, a testament to the indomitable will of a man who had clawed his way from villainy to heroism. The beam never reached him. It simply stopped, its light and heat unraveling like a frayed thread. And then, the unraveling traveled back to its source. Izuku watched in horror. Endeavor didn't scream. He didn't burn or explode. His flames flickered, the color draining from them until they were a transparent, ghostly gray. Then the fire vanished. The man himself began to thin, his form becoming translucent. His expression was not one of pain, but of utter, soul-shaking confusion, as if he was forgetting how to exist. He looked down at his hands as they faded into nothing, his legacy, his atonement, his very being erased from the tapestry of existence. One moment, endeavor was there. The next, there was just empty space. Not even a memory of heat lingered in the air. No! Izuku screamed, the sound feeling stolen from his lungs. The heroes around him were paralyzed, not by fear, but by a fundamental incomprehension. How do you fight something that doesn't kill you, but unmakes you? His story was complete, Nexus All for One stated, as if offering a literary critique. Redemption, sacrifice. A satisfying, if predictable, arc. It is kinder to close the book than to let the pages fray. Hawks was next. He was a streak of crimson in the fractured sky, his feathers moving with impossible speed, trying to evacuate a pocket of trapped civilians. The entity didn't even look at him. A ripple of that same silent wrongness expanded outwards. Hawks's wings dissolved first, turning into a cloud of gray dust that had no substance. He fell, his flight and freedom, the core of his identity, revoked. He hit the ground not with a body, but as a faint gray outline that blew away in a non-existent wind. Panic, true and absolute, finally broke the hero's paralysis. It was a rout. You can't punch non-existence. You can't freeze a logical fallacy. Hold the line! Best Genius roared, his voice strained, weaving colossal cables of carbon fiber into a shield to protect a retreating bus of children. We do not break. We are heroes, the entity tilted its head. Heroism. An interesting concept. So exclusionary. Let's broaden the definition. The carbon fiber shield didn't break. It turned to dust. Genist himself stiffened, his body losing its texture and color, becoming a flat, two-dimensional sketch of himself before that too was wiped away like chalk on a blackboard. Izuku felt a sob tear through him. His mind was a maelstrom of terror and grief. He could feel one for all churning within him, a tempest of power that had no target. The vestiges were screaming in his soul, a chorus of rage and disbelief. This isn't a quirk. The second user raged. It's a fundamental law. He's the endpoint. He's not destroying. Ninth, Nana Shimura whispered, her voice laced with a mother's terror. He's editing. The battle devolved into a desperate, surreal nightmare. Heroes charged, their quirks flaring for a brilliant, defiant second before being negated, their very existence nullified. Mirko, the rabbit hero, got the closest. She was a blur of motion, her legs pistons of raw power, aimed in a devastating kick at the entity's core. Her leg passed right through him. Such fierce vitality, the chorus voice commented, almost admiringly. A shame it is bound to such a fragile vessel. Mirko landed, stumbling, and looked back. Her leg was gone. Not severed, not bleeding. Simply gone. The erasure crawled up her body like a disease, and with a final, grit-toothed glare of pure, untamable defiance, she too was gone. Amidst the chaos, Izuku saw the glimmers of hope being systematically extinguished. His friends. His family. Shoto Todoroki stood his ground, a bastion of ice and fire against the encroaching silence. On his left, a raging inferno formed a wall of heat that warped reality. On his right, a glacier of impossible size erupted from the ground, a frozen tsunami meant to cage the void. It was the ultimate expression of his balanced power, the acceptance of his whole self. You are a paradox, Nexus all for one observed, turning his swirling vortex of a face toward him. Hot and cold. Fire and ice. Duality is inefficient. He reached out, and the fundamental laws of thermodynamics in Shoto's vicinity were simply suspended. The fire didn't go out, it ceased to be hot. The ice didn't melt, it ceased to be cold. They became mere sculptures, gray and inert. Shoto gasped, clutching his chest as the very essence of his being was unplugged from the universe. He looked at Izuku, his dichromatic eyes wide with a silent, desperate plea, a final acknowledgement of their friendship, before his entire form dissolved into a fine, gray mist that settled on the ground and then vanished. Shoto. The name was a raw wound in Izuku's throat. He felt a gentle touch on his arm and turned to see Achiko Uraraka, her face pale, streaked with dirt and tears, but her eyes, those warm brown eyes, were filled with a terrifying resolve. Izuku, we have to do something. Her quirk was about hope. About making things lighter. About defying the crushing gravity of the world. She slapped her hands on a massive piece of rubble, intending to hurl it, to create a distraction, anything. The rock floated, but it too lost its color, becoming a gray, weightless ghost of a thing before crumbling into nothing. The entity's attention fell upon her. Ah, the manipulator of fundamental forces. A noble attempt. But gravity is merely a suggestion in the grand manuscript. The erasure began at her feet. Izuku saw it start, the color draining from her boots. He lunged, his mind screaming, every fiber of his being wanting to pull her away, to shield her, to do what heroes were supposed to do. Achiko. She reached for him, her expression shifting from terror to a heartbreakingly soft acceptance. Her fingers stretched towards his, close enough to almost touch. He saw her lips form his name, a silent Izuku. Her fingertips began to fray, turning to dust just an inch from his own. He watched, helpless, as the nothingness climbed her arm, her shoulder, her neck. Her eyes, fixed on his, held a universe of unspoken words until they too faded into the all-consuming gray. She left behind nothing. No body. No echo. Just an empty space where his best friend had been. The grief was a physical blow, so immense it nearly stopped his heart. He fell to his knees, the power of one for all feeling like a useless, heavy shroud. What was the point of all this strength if he couldn't even save one person? It was in that moment of despair that he saw him. A skeletal, emaciated figure, standing not in defiance, but in protection. All Might. Toshinori Yagi, in his true form, had no fight left in him. The last embers of One for All were long gone. He was just a man, but he stood before a shattered storefront where a handful of terrified civilians huddled, his arms spread wide, his body a fragile, human shield. He was smiling, not his radiant, symbol of peace smile, but a gentle, reassuring smile that promised safety even at the end of all things. Nexus All for One seemed to almost ignore him, his presence too insignificant to warrant direct attention. But the wave of unmaking was spreading, a slow tide of entropy washing over the ruins. It touched the edge of All Might's tattered shirt. Toshinori didn't fade like the others. He began to glow, a faint, warm, golden light emanating from his chest. It was the ghost of One for All, the lingering concept of his heroism, the absolute, unshakable conviction that defined him. "It's all right now," he said, his voice weak but clear, carrying across the silent battlefield. He looked over his shoulder at the crying family behind him, and then his eyes found Izuku's across the wasteland. They were filled with pride. With love. Why? Because I am here. The golden light flared, a final, brilliant spark against the encroaching darkness, holding the tide of nothingness at bay for one precious second. In that second, the civilians behind him scrambled deeper into the rubble, given a moment more of existence. And then, the light went out. Toshinori Yagi, the symbol of peace, crumbled, not into gray dust, but into motes of golden light that drifted up and vanished, one by one. His final act was not a punch, but a promise. Izuku was broken. The world had ended. His master, his friends, his heroes, all gone. There was nothing left to fight for. The vestiges in his soul were silent, mourning. All was lost, and then there were two. The entity's voice was closer now. It was observing him, the last piece on the board. But it was wrong. There were not two. Deku. A sound finally broke through the oppressive silence. A roar of pure, unadulterated rage. Katsuki Bakugo was a comet of orange light and fury. He hadn't been charging or strategizing. He had been building, storing every ounce of his power, every drop of nitroglycerin-like sweat, for one final, cataclysmic attack. He flew through the air, his trajectory a straight, unwavering line, his eyes burning with a light that rivaled the sun. "You like erasing things?" he bellowed, his voice raw with grief and hatred. "Then try erasing this." He wasn't fighting for victory. Izuku knew that. He was fighting to leave a mark. To prove that he existed. To scar the face of the void. This was his entire life's philosophy condensed into a single, explosive moment. "Kaken, no!" Izuku screamed, scrambling to his feet. Bakugo glanced at him for a fraction of a second. There was no mockery in his eyes. No rivalry. Just a raw, unspoken understanding. A final acknowledgement. "Live, you damn nerd." AP shot, howitzer impact. It was more than an explosion. It was an apotheosis. A star was born and died in the space of a heartbeat. The world, which had been leached of all color and sound, was suddenly filled with blinding orange light and the deafening, world-shattering roar of Bakugo's ultimate attack. The blast consumed him, a willing sacrifice, focusing all of his existence into a singular point of defiance aimed directly at the heart of Nexus All for One. The force of the blast was so immense it tore the fabric of the already broken reality. For a glorious, beautiful moment, it seemed to work. The entity's dark form was consumed by the fire. A hole of light punched directly through the nothingness. But the light, like all other things, faded. The sound died, sucked back into the silence. The crater of scorched earth where the entity had stood was now smooth, untouched. And the entity itself was still there, unharmed. It looked down at its chest, where the blast had hit. For the first time, a flicker of something akin to interest crossed its composite voice. Remarkable. The echo of his existence. It actually stung. A primitive, but potent, declaration of self. Of Bakugo, there was nothing left. Not even dust. He had poured every last fiber of his being into that attack. He had existed so fiercely that his departure left a hole in the world more profound than any other. The silence he left behind was the loudest of all. And now, Izuku Midoriya was truly, utterly alone. He stood in a gray, silent world, a ghost in a graveyard of his own memories. The ruins around him were losing their definition, the edges of buildings blurring as the concept of structure began to fail. Nexus All for One drifted before him. It was over. The entity had won. One for all, the chorus voice said, its tone now holding a hint of finality. The linchpin. A fascinating anomaly. A quirk that stockpiles not just energy, but will. Legacy. The very concept of story. It is the first knot in the tapestry of this reality. Once it is undone, the rest will unravel cleanly. It reached a hand toward Izuku's forehead. This was it. The end. Izuku closed his eyes, seeing the faces of his mother, All Might, Uraraka, Ida, Shoto, Kaken, a slideshow of a life he had failed to protect. A wave of despair so absolute it was almost peaceful washed over him. But deep within him, something refused to be peaceful. One for All was more than a quirk. It was a legacy of defiance. It was born from an act of rebellion, a brother giving a seemingly useless power to another. It was nurtured by those who fought against impossible odds. It was the collected will of 8 souls who had stared into the abyss of All for One and refused to blink. And now, it was the vessel for Izuku Midoriya's boundless, shattering grief. Grief, he was learning, was its own form of power. It was the echo of love. And love was the ultimate affirmation of existence. As the entity's fingers neared, One for All did not flare with green lightning. It did not surge with kinetic force. It erupted in a silent, blinding cataclysm of pure, undiluted white light. It was not a light of energy or heat. It was the light of being. The raw, conceptual light of existence itself. It poured out of Izuku, fueled by the love for everyone he had lost, by the defiant roar of Bakugo, by the quiet smile of All Might, by the outstretched hand of Uraraka. It was the combined I am here of 9 generations, screamed into the face of non-existence. The vestiges appeared around him, not as faint ghosts, but as solid avatars of white light. Yoichi Shigaraki, his hand raised in defiance. The second and third, grim sentinels. Haikid Shinomori, a silent shield. Daigoro Banjo, a coiled whip of light. En, a protective shroud. Nana Shimura, her hands outstretched as if to protect her child. And Tashinori Yagi, a brilliant, smiling sun. They stood with him, a united front. Nexus All for One recoiled for the first time, not from force, but from principle. What is this? This is not power. This is stubbornness. A conceptual refusal. The white light of One for All pushed against the encroaching nothingness. It did not destroy the unmaking, it simply denied it. It created a sanctuary of reality around Izuku, a bubble in which existence was still the supreme law. But the conflict between absolute existence and absolute non-existence was too much for the dying universe to bear. The cracks in the sky, which had been silent fissures, now screamed. They shattered, spreading downwards, across the horizon, across the ground beneath Izuku's feet. The sound was not of breaking glass, but of the universe's source code being deleted. The world dissolved. Not into gray, but into pure chaos. The ground fell away, replaced by a torrent of falling stars. The sky collapsed inward, the moon and sun crumbling like sandcastles. Izuku saw glimpses of other places, other times. A classroom at UA, the beach he had cleaned, All Might's dying form, all shattering into a million pieces and flowing into the cracks. Reality was coming apart at the seams. Izuku, encased in the protective cocoon of One for All's light, could only watch as his entire universe was shredded and fed into the abyss. The light held, a single, defiant lifeboat in a cosmic maelstrom. It was the last ember of a universe that had burned so brightly. Then, the chaos stopped. The noise, the light, the falling pieces of his world, it all winked out of existence. He was floating. There was no up or down. No light or dark, only a perfect, featureless, and infinite black. There was no air, yet he could breathe. There was no sound, not even the beating of his own heart. The silence was so absolute, so profound, that it was a physical pressure. It was the silence of a library after the last book has turned to dust. He was alone. Utterly, completely, and eternally alone. the last man in a creation that was no longer there. The light of one for all had receded, now just a faint, warm spark in his chest, the only thing he could feel. He floated for an eternity, or perhaps it was only a second. In the void, time had no meaning. His grief was too large for his body, his loneliness too vast for his mind. He was a ghost, haunting the grave of everything. And then, a voice spoke. It was not loud. It was not threatening. It was calm, dispassionate, and utterly alien. It was the voice of a scholar reading a footnote, and it echoed not in the void, but in the center of his consciousness. Log entry: Universe 734 has been consumed. One anomaly remains. The seed is secure. The silence was the first thing to break. It was not a loud noise that shattered the infinite quiet, but the softest, most mundane of sounds, the gentle rustle of a page being turned. Izuku Midoriya, who had been adrift in a sensory vacuum for what felt like 1,000 years, flinched at the intrusion. The sound was an anchor in the nothingness, and his consciousness, a drowning man, clung to it. Another sensation followed, a smell. It was the scent of old paper, dry ink, and the faint, sharp tang of ozone, like the air after a lightning strike. Then came the feeling of substance. Solid ground materialized beneath his feet, firm and unyielding. He stumbled, his legs having forgotten the concept of weight, and fell to his knees on a floor that felt like cool, polished obsidian. He opened his eyes. He was no longer in the void. He was in a library, but it was a library on a scale that shattered the human mind's ability to comprehend. The walls were shelves, stretching upwards into a swirling nebula of soft, violet light that served as a ceiling. They did not hold books of paper and ink, but countless bound volumes whose covers were made of shimmering light, and whose pages seemed to be woven from captured starlight. Some glowed with the gentle pulse of a distant galaxy. Others were dark and heavy, containing only a single, dying ember within. The air hummed with a low, resonant frequency, the collective whisper of a million forgotten stories. A grand central aisle, paved in the same dark obsidian, stretched forward into an impossible distance, flanked by these colossal shelves of cosmic lore. "Curious," a voice said. It was the same calm, dispassionate voice from the void. "Your biological functions are attempting to initiate a panic response. Increased heart rate, adrenaline production, yet your conceptual state remains remarkably stable. The seed is protecting you." Izuku's head snapped up. Standing before him, near a floating lectern made of crystal, was the source of the voice. It was a being in the shape of a man, yet it was made of no substance he could recognize. Its form was a silhouette cut from the fabric of space, and within that silhouette churned a slow, majestic ballet of stars, comets, and nebulae. Its head was a swirling galaxy, its eyes two bright, white dwarf stars that regarded him with an unnerving, analytical curiosity. It held a book bound in what looked like solidified night, and as it closed the cover, the sound echoed like a dying sun. This was the archivist. Where am I?" Izuku croaked, his voice raw and unused. "What is this place?" "This is the Nexus," the being replied, its starry form shifting. A constellation that looked vaguely like a hand gestured to the infinite library around them. "A pocket dimension outside the conventional flow of space-time. It is my place of work. My function is to observe, to record, and to catalog the stories of every universe. This volume," it patted the dark book, "is the final entry for Universe 734. Your universe." The words hit Izuku like a physical blow. "Final entry? What do you mean? What happened?" "My friends, All Might, Kaken." His voice broke, the dam of his composure finally cracking. The faces of his loved ones, fading into dust and nothingness, flashed behind his eyes. "They are gone, Izuku Midoriya," the archivist stated, with no malice, but also no comfort. It was a statement of fact, like noting the temperature. "Their stories have concluded, as has the story of your world, your galaxy, your entire dimensional reality." "No," Izuku whispered, shaking his head in denial. "No, that's not possible. We were fighting that thing, that other All-for-One, Nexus All-for-One, as it styles itself," the archivist corrected. It raised its constellation hand, and the air between them shimmered. An image formed in the shimmering space, a magnificent, sprawling tree of light, with billions of branches, each branch a universe, each leaf a world. This was the multiverse, a near-infinite collection of realities, each unique, each vibrant with its own story. Then, a darkness appeared at the base of the tree. A creeping, hungry void that began to climb the trunk. Izuku watched in horror as, branch by branch, the lights of the universes flickered and died, consumed by the encroaching emptiness. He began as one of your kind. A man with the ability to take from others. The archivist explained, its voice a calm narration over the cosmic genocide. In his home reality, he achieved his goal of ultimate power. But he grew bored. He learned to pierce the veil between worlds, and his appetite grew. He no longer sought the abilities of men, but the core concepts of realities. He does not merely destroy. He consumes, he assimilates. He takes the energy, the stories, the very laws of physics of a universe, and adds them to his own being, leaving nothing but a null space in his wake. The darkness in the vision consumed the last branch, a bright, defiant little light that Izuku knew was his own world. The entire tree of existence was gone, replaced by a single, monolithic pillar of darkness with a swirling, malevolent consciousness at its center. The multiverse is gone. The archivist concluded, the image fading. All of it. Erased. Collated. Unified into a single, silent consciousness. He believes he has brought peace. The peace of the grave. Izuku stared at the empty space where the vision had been, his mind reeling. The scale of the loss was too immense to process. It wasn't just his friends, not just his city, not just his planet. It was everything. Every possible world, every version of his friends, every stranger in every reality. All gone. An infinite chorus of lives silenced forever. A wave of nausea and despair so profound it felt like a physical weight threatened to crush him. Then, why am I here? He finally choked out, looking down at his own hands, which were solid and real. Why did I survive? Because of what you carry. The archivist said, its stellar eyes focusing on Izuku's chest. You are the anomaly. The one loose thread he could not unravel. It gestured again, and a new image appeared, the swirling, fiery core of One for All within Izuku. Your quirk, One for All, is unique in all of creation. It was designed to stockpile power, yes. But it did more than that. With each user who held it, who lived and fought and hoped and despaired, it stockpiled something far more fundamental. It stockpiled willpower. It stockpiled legacy. It stockpiled the very conceptual essence of heroism. Hope. Sacrifice. Defiance. The image of One for All pulsed with a brilliant white light, the same light that had protected him at the very end. When your universe faced its final moment, that stockpiled essence reached a critical mass. It became a genesis seed. A concentrated, indivisible spark of reality itself. It is a concept made manifest, the story of heroism given form. Nexus All for One could not consume it because it is the antithesis of his being. He is the end of all stories. The seed is the beginning of one. He is static nothingness. It is the potential for everything. The archivist lowered its hand. My purpose is only to observe. I cannot interfere. But I am permitted to preserve. At the moment of annihilation, when the seed flared, it created a paradox he could not resolve. In that sliver of an instant, I was able to shield you, to pull you and the seed out of the timeline and into the nexus. You are, for all intents and purposes, the last piece of reality left. The last piece of reality. The words echoed in the vast emptiness of Izuku's soul. He was not just the last hero. He was the last anything. The weight of that revelation was heavier than any building he'd ever lifted, any punch he'd ever thrown. He was a museum exhibit for a creation that no longer existed. Tears streamed down his face, silent tracks on his dirt-stained cheeks. He didn't try to stop them. What was the point? There was no one left to see, no one left to be strong for. He cried for his mother's smile, for All Might's pride, for Ida's rigid loyalty, for Shoto's quiet friendship, for Achiko's gentle strength, for Kaken's fiery, undeniable presence. He cried for the billions he had never met, for the stories that would now never be told. The archivist watched him, its expression unreadable, a silent observer to the grief of a lost creation. It let him weep until the sobs subsided into shuddering, empty breaths. The grief is a logical and expected response, the cosmic being stated finally. It is the echo of connection. But it is not the end of the log. Izuku looked up, his eyes red and swollen. What else is there? It's over. He won. He has achieved his goal. The archivist corrected. Winning is a subjective term. What was consumed can, in theory, be restored. The process of destruction leaves an imprint. An echo. It turned and glided down the obsidian aisle. Izuku, feeling a sliver of something other than despair, followed. They came to the far end of the library, which ended not in a wall, but in a vast, circular window of pure crystal. Through it, he could see the void. It was exactly as he remembered it. An infinite, featureless black. But now, his eyes adjusted by the nexus, he could see more. Floating in the emptiness were faint, ghostly spheres of gray light, countless of them, like a graveyard of dead stars. They were hazy, indistinct, like afterimages burned onto the back of his eyelids. The graveyard of worlds, the archivist said, its voice soft for the first time. These are the world echoes. The faint psychic and conceptual residue of the universes that were consumed. They are lifeless, soundless, devoid of spirit and color. They are the scars left behind on reality's corpse. Izuku stared, his heart aching. He could almost imagine one of those gray spheres was his home. He searched for some sign, some familiar shape in the mists, but found nothing. They were all equally dead. They are inert. The archivist continued. But they are not empty. At the center of each echo is its heart, the conceptual core from which that reality's spirit once blossomed. It could be a place, an object, an idea of immense significance. A throne, a tree, a supercomputer, a song. The archivist turned its stellar gaze from the window to Izuku. The Genesis seed you carry, it is named for a reason. It is a seed. It can be planted. If you were to take it to the heart of a world echo, you could, theoretically, reignite it. You could use the seed's concentrated essence of reality to restart the echo's core, to bring back its color, its sound, its life. A spark ignited in the barren wasteland of Izuku's chest. A tiny, fragile flicker of hope? I can bring them back. I can save them. You can begin the process. The archivist clarified, tempering his excitement with a dose of cosmic reality. You would not be recreating what was lost. You cannot bring back the specific people, the exact histories. You would be creating something new from the ashes of the old. A new universe born from the echo of the last. You would be a gardener, planting a new forest where the old one was burned away. The image was powerful. A gardener. Not a soldier. Not an avenger. A creator. But this path is not without its cost. The archivist added, its tone returning to its usual dispassionate neutrality. The seed is a part of you now, fused with your soul and one for all. To use it is to give a piece of yourself away. Each restoration will drain you. It will take your energy, your memories, your very existence, and weave them into the fabric of the new world. You may restore a handful of worlds, or 100, but eventually the seed, and you, will be spent. You will fade, completely consumed by your own act of creation. The choice was laid bare before him. He could remain here, in the Nexus, the last living being, a sad relic in a cosmic library. Or he could step out into that graveyard and pour his own existence into the faint hope of creating new life, knowing it would eventually destroy him. It wasn't a choice at all. His grief was still a raw, gaping wound. But the image of Achiko's fading hand, of All Might's final, proud smile, of Kaken's defiant blaze of glory, they were not memories of defeat. They were instructions. They were a legacy to be honored. He could not bring them back, but he could build a new existence where people like them could live, and love, and fight for what they believed in. The sheer weight of the task, the loneliness of the road ahead, threatened to swallow him. He was just a boy. A hero student. How could he possibly become the genesis of a new multiverse? He was overwhelmed, terrified, and so profoundly alone. He closed his eyes, instinctively retreating to the one place that had always been his sanctuary. He found himself in the familiar subconscious realm of One for All. The misty, ethereal space was different now. It was no longer hazy. but filled with the pure, soft white light of the Genesis seed. The 8 chairs were still there, arranged in their familiar circle. And sitting in them were the vestiges. They were no longer faint, blue-green specters. They were solid, formed from the same white light as their surroundings. They were the last ghosts of their world, the co-keepers of the seed. His eyes fell on Nana Shimura. She was smiling at him, a sad, gentle, maternal smile that spoke of shared grief and unwavering support. "It's a heavy burden, Izuku," she said, her voice a soothing balm on his frayed nerves. "Too heavy for any one person to carry." "But you are not one person," said another voice. Yoichi Shigaraki, the first, stood up and walked toward him. His form was less defined than the others, more like a flickering flame, but his eyes were ancient and kind. "Not anymore. You are the 9th, the culmination. You are the vessel, but we are the fuel. We are with you." Izuku finally broke. He fell to his knees before them, the tears starting anew. "I couldn't save anyone," he whispered, the confession tearing from his soul. "I had all this power, and I watched everyone die." Nana was there in an instant, her light form kneeling before him, her hand on his shoulder. It felt warm, real. "You saved the chance for there to be anyone ever again. That is a victory on a scale none of us could have ever imagined. You saved hope itself, my boy. My brother's philosophy was to take, to hoard, to possess until all was one thing, him," Yoichi said, his voice resonating with centuries of defiance. "He has finally achieved it on a multiversal scale. He has created an existence of perfect unity and perfect silence. A story with only one character and one word, the end. Our power was always the antithesis of that. To give. To connect. To pass the torch. The story of one for all is a story that never ends. It is a promise that there will always be a new page to turn." He placed a hand on Izuku's other shoulder. "This is not a mission of revenge, 9th. You cannot punch the void until your friends come back. Vengeance is a story that ends in ashes. You have been given a new purpose now. You must create. You must build. You must take this ember we saved and light new suns. That is how you will defeat my brother, not by destroying him, but by making his victory irrelevant." Izuku looked up, through his tears, at the faces of the vestiges. He saw Daigoro Banjo give him a thumbs up, a wide, encouraging grin on his face of light. He saw Heike Shinomori nod, his long hair swaying, a silent promise of support. He saw the second and third, their arms crossed, their expressions grim but resolute. They were all here. He was not alone. He carried the last remnants of his entire world within his own soul. He took a deep, shuddering breath and stood up, the light of the seed pulsing in time with his own heartbeat. The tears subsided, replaced by a quiet, unbreakable resolve that settled deep in his bones. This was his purpose now. This was the final, greatest meaning of being a hero. The power to save was now the power to create. He opened his eyes, back in the Nexus. The archivist had been watching him silently, its head tilted. Izuku met its stellar gaze, his own eyes clear and determined. The despair was still there, a cold stone in his stomach, but it was no longer his master. It was his fuel. "Okay," he said, his voice steady. "I'll do it." He walked to the great crystal window, placing his hand on its cool surface. He looked out at the silent, gray graveyard of what once was. It was no longer a monument to his failure. It was a field, fallow and waiting. "Show me the way," he said, his voice ringing with a purpose far older and greater than himself. "Show me the first world." The archivist nodded once, a slow, majestic inclination of its galactic head. "As you wish, Gardener." It raised a hand, and a section of the obsidian floor before the window rippled. It dissolved, not into nothingness, but into a swirling vortex of gray mist, the same lifeless gray as the world echoes. It was a doorway into the dead spaces between realities. Izuku Midoriya took a breath, clutching the warm spark of 9 souls in his chest. Then, with the memory of a world to honor and the hope of a universe to build, he took the first step into the graveyard of worlds. The transition was not a step, but a fall into silence. One moment, Izuku stood on the cool obsidian of the Nexus, the ambient hum of a million stored stories a gentle pressure in the air. The next, he was submerged in an absolute sensory vacuum. The gray vortex of the portal deposited him not onto a street, but into a state of being. He was standing on what his eyes told him was asphalt, but his feet felt no texture. He was surrounded by towering skyscrapers, but their presence cast no shadow. The world was a photograph, developed in shades of ash and slate. The silence was the worst part. It was not an absence of noise, it was an active, crushing presence. It was the sound of a billion voices silenced at once, a scream so loud it had become its own opposite. He tried to take a breath and felt air enter his lungs, but there was no feeling of coolness, no scent of city smog or distant rain. It was neutral, sterile, a substance without properties. He looked up. The sky was a uniform, featureless gray, a concrete ceiling pressed down upon the world. The buildings around him were titans of glass and steel, their architecture sleek and futuristic, but they were utterly without color. They were gravestones in a city of ghosts. A sleek, aerodynamic vehicle, something far more advanced than anything from his own world, sat motionless in the middle of a wide boulevard, its metallic sheen replaced by a dull, matte gray. On a corner, a newspaper was frozen mid-tumble, caught in a wind that no longer blew, its headline an unreadable block of muted text. This place wasn't destroyed. It wasn't a ruin. It was paused. Edited. Leached of all vitality, like a flower pressed between the pages of a book until all its color and life had faded, leaving only a brittle, gray impression of what it once was. The sheer, oppressive wrongness of it all made his skin crawl. This was a world without quirks, the archivist had implied, a world of technology. He could see it in the clean lines of the city, the advanced design of the infrastructure. These people had built a utopia of logic and order, and its final state was this perfect, orderly tomb. The emotional weight of the place was staggering. He could feel the absence of its inhabitants like a phantom limb, a constant, aching void where laughter, conversation, and the simple hum of life should be. He was the only living thing here. The only spot of color. His green and black costume, though tattered and stained, was a defiant splash of vibrancy in an ocean of monochrome. "Okay," he whispered, his own voice sounding shockingly loud, yet simultaneously muffled, as if the silence was trying to smother it at birth. "Where do I start?" The city was vast, an endless labyrinth of dead streets. He had no map, no guide. He was looking for the world's heart, a concept so abstract he could barely grasp it. He closed his eyes, shutting out the bleak panorama, and focused inward. He reached for one for all, not for its power, but for its sensitivity. He let the quiet energy of the Genesis seed spread through him, a warm current in the cold sea of his veins. He tried to feel what the vestiges felt, to see through their ethereal senses. "It's so quiet," came the soft, mournful thought of Nana Shimura from within his soul. "Not even the ghosts of them are left." He didn't just kill them. The second user's voice rasped, sharp and analytical. He unwrote them. "This isn't a crime scene. It's a blank page. How do we find it?" Izuku projected his thoughts to them. "The heart. What am I even looking for?" A new voice, ancient and calm, provided the answer. "Yoichi Shigaraki. Don't search for a presence. Search for an absence. Nexus all for one consumes, but the act of consumption leaves a scar." The heart was the brightest point of this reality. Its removal would have left the deepest hole. We are looking for the epicenter of the emptiness. Following that strange, paradoxical instruction, Izuku stretched out his senses. He ignored the oppressive silence, and searched for its source. He imagined the life of this world as a great tapestry of light, and he was searching for the spot where the central thread had been violently yanked out, causing the rest to unravel. There. It was faint, a subtle pull in the fabric of the nothingness. It wasn't a beacon of light, but a focal point of darkness. A place where the emptiness was somehow emptier. It was to the north, deep within the city's core. "I think I feel it," he murmured. "It feels complex," Daigoro Banjo's voice added, a hint of curiosity in his tone. "Like a million tangled threads all leading back to one spot. A web." Izuku opened his eyes, his direction set. He began to run. His footsteps made no sound. The world slid by in a silent gray blur. He was a phantom moving through a purgatory of concrete and steel. The lack of sensory feedback was deeply disorienting. He ran at incredible speeds, yet felt no wind against his face. He leapt over motionless vehicles, landing without a single thud. It was like moving through a dream, and he had to fight a rising sense of derealization, the terrifying thought that he, too, was becoming a ghost. The vestiges kept him anchored. Their presence was a constant, a small chorus of life in his soul that reminded him he was still real. The pull grew stronger, the feeling of a great void deepening as he approached the city center. The buildings here were even larger, their ambition more pronounced. He was entering what was clearly the financial and technological hub. He finally skidded to a halt in a massive, circular plaza. In its center stood a single tower that dwarfed all others. It was a masterpiece of architecture, a monolithic spear of polished black material that seemed to drink the non-existent light. Unlike the surrounding buildings, it had no windows. Its smooth surface was etched with intricate, geometric patterns that resembled complex circuitry, glowing with a faint, internal gray light. At its base, a single name was carved in elegant, simple script above a set of massive, sealed doors: Omnius Tower. "This is it," Nana's voice was a whisper of awe. "The connection, it all leads here. I can feel the echoes of a billion conversations, a billion searches for knowledge, a billion moments of human connection, all flowing in and out of this place." This was the heart. Not a throne of a tyrant or a sacred tree, but a monument to this world's collective intellect and unity. The main doors were sealed shut, seamless and solid. With a flicker of green lightning, another shocking splash of color in the gray world, Izuku gently pushed. The immense doors swung inward without a sound, opening into a cavernous lobby. Inside, the silence was even deeper. The air was still and cold. The lobby was a grand, minimalist space. Wires as thick as his arms snaked across the ceiling and down the walls like dead ivy, their indicator lights all dark. Rows of what looked like reception drones stood frozen behind a long, sweeping desk, their optical sensors like blind gray eyes. It was a place of immense, dormant power. Guided by the pull, Izuku walked through the lobby, his gaze drawn to a single archway at the far end. It led into a chamber so vast it felt more like a cathedral, and in the center of that cathedral was the heart. It was a supercomputer, but that word was woefully inadequate. It was a sphere of interwoven crystalline structures and gleaming golden conduits, suspended in the center of the massive, cylindrical chamber by a web of thick, dark cables. It was easily the size of a small house. A soft, internal gray light pulsed from its core, a faint, sleeping heartbeat. This was it, the nexus of this world's entire information network. Their library, their communication hub, their greatest collective achievement. It was the Omnius. Izuku approached it slowly, a sense of reverence filling him. This machine was not just a tool, it was the symbol of this reality's soul. He could feel the ghost of its purpose: to connect, to calculate, to serve. To bring an entire planet together into a single, cohesive society. He reached the edge of the platform surrounding the sphere and placed a hand on a cool, smooth access panel. The pull was overwhelming now, a drain that seemed to be actively trying to pull the warmth of one for all out of him. "This is it," he said to the vestiges, his voice a reverent whisper. "This is the place. Be careful, Ninth," warned the second user. "You are about to pour your own life force into this thing. There is no telling what it will do." Izuku knew the risks. The archivist's warning echoed in his mind. It will drain you of your own existence. But what was his existence for if not this? He took a deep breath, planting his feet firmly. He placed both hands on the surface of the machine. He closed his eyes and reached deep inside himself, past the grief and the exhaustion, to the warm, white-hot core of the Genesis seed. He did not channel it like a smash. He didn't focus it into a weapon. He simply opened the gates. He let it flow. The sensation was excruciating. It was not a sudden burst of pain, but a slow, agonizing drain, like lifeblood being siphoned from his very soul. It felt like threads of his being were being gently but inexorably pulled from him, weaving themselves into the cold machine. The Genesis seed, the very essence of his reality, flowed from his palms into the computer's core. But the machine remained dark. It was taking, but it wasn't igniting. It's not enough, Yoichi's voice was strained. Raw power, raw conceptual energy isn't what a world is made of. A story needs more than just a blank page and ink. It needs an idea. It needs a theme. You have to give it something to build from. Give it a memory, a memory. He had to pour not just his power, but his self into it. Gritting his teeth against the draining sensation, Izuku searched his own mind, his own heart, for the right memory to offer. This world's heart was about connection. Unity. So he would give it his own purest memories of the same. He focused on a single moment, crystal clear in his mind's eye, a skinny, quirkless boy standing on a rooftop, tears streaming down his face, his dreams in ashes. And then, a skeletal figure, a hero brought low, speaking the words that changed everything. You too can become a hero. He didn't just remember it. He poured it. The hope, the desperation, the overwhelming, soul-shaking joy of that first true connection with his idol. He felt the warmth of that memory leave him, flowing down his arms and into the machine. A cold, hollow ache replaced it, as if a treasured photograph in his mind had been burned away. A single, soft blue light flickered to life in the heart of the Omnius. It wasn't enough. He needed more. He pushed deeper. He gave it the memory of the UA entrance exam. The terror, the feeling of uselessness, and then the sudden, instinctive lunge to save a girl he didn't even know. He poured in the image of Uraraka's face, her surprise, and the crushing, bone-shattering power of his first smash. He gave the machine the memory of teamwork, of selfless sacrifice for a stranger. More blue lights flickered on, forming a small cluster. The machine hummed, a low, single note that was the first true sound this world had heard in an age. The drain intensified. He felt his own identity starting to fray at the edges. But he couldn't stop. He was so close. He gave it more. The memory of Ida's hand on his shoulder, a rigid but sincere offer of friendship. The image of Todoroki, finally using his fire, the silent acknowledgement of a rivalry and a bond being forged in the heat of battle. He gave it the memory of the training camp, of Class 1A working together, laughing together, their disparate personalities forming a single, chaotic, beautiful family. Each memory he gave was a physical tearing. The joy of those moments was being leached from him, becoming fuel for this new world. He cried out, a raw, agonized sound that was finally swallowed by the machine's rising hum. His knees buckled, but he forced himself to stay upright, his hands pressed firmly against the panel. Stay with us, Izuku. It was Nana's voice, a lifeline in the storm of pain. Don't lose yourself in there. Hold on. He needed one more. One final, powerful memory of connection and hope. He thought of Eri. He pictured her small, terrified face, twisted in pain and fear under Overhaul's control. He remembered the feeling of her clinging to his back, the desperate fusion of their wills, and then, the moment of her salvation. The pure, unadulterated, world-changing power of her first smile. A smile he had helped create, the ultimate expression of saving someone not just from a villain, but from their own despair. He poured that smile into the machine. He gave it the purest, most selfless moment of heroism he had ever known. The sacrifice of that memory was the most painful of all. It felt like a piece of his heart was being physically carved out. A guttural scream tore from his throat, and his vision went white with pain. And then, the machine roared to life. A wave of brilliant, cerulean light erupted from the Omnius, washing over the chamber. The hum rose in pitch and complexity, becoming a symphony of harmonious tones. The single note became a chord, the chord became a melody. The sound of a world waking up. The light pulsed from the tower, a shockwave of creation. Izuku, his strength completely gone, collapsed to the floor, his connection to the machine severed. He lay on his side, panting, every inch of his body screaming in protest. He felt hollowed out, scoured clean. Lighter, but in the most terrifying way imaginable. He tried to recall the warmth of All Might's encouragement, the pride of his friendship with Ida, the joy of Eri's smile. He could remember the facts of them, but the emotional resonance was gone, a phantom limb of the soul. He had paid the price. Through blurry eyes, he watched the miracle he had bought. The blue light surged from the Omnius Tower, spreading through the city like a fast-blooming dawn. As the light passed, it painted the world with life. The gray skyscrapers shimmered, their surfaces resolving into gleaming silver, bronze, and white. The windows, once opaque slate, became transparent, reflecting a sky that was slowly, miraculously, turning from gray to a soft, pale blue. Color bled back into the world. The motionless vehicles turned from gray to shades of red, blue, and black. The frozen newspaper on the corner became a crisp white with bold, black lettering. The trees in the plaza, which had been brittle gray statues, softened, their bark turning a rich brown, their leaves a vibrant, budding green. Then came the sound. The symphony from the tower was joined by a chorus of new noises. The gentle hum of electricity returning to the city's grid. The faint, distant whisper of a newly born wind weaving its way through the concrete canyons. The soft creak of metal settling and the almost inaudible rustle of new leaves. The world was still empty of people, but it was no longer dead. It was expectant. It was a stage, freshly set, waiting for the actors to arrive. It was a newborn reality, fragile and quiet, taking its first breath. Izuku watched it all, a single, painful tear tracing a path through the grime on his cheek. He had done it. He had lit the first candle in the endless dark. His arm, the one that had been pressed most firmly against the machine, flickered. For a moment, he could see the crystalline floor straight through his gauntlet and his hand. It was becoming translucent. A familiar presence coalesced beside him. The archivist stood there, its starry form a stark contrast to the clean, technological lines of the chamber. It looked not at Izuku, but at the awakening world outside, a painter examining a new canvas. Log entry: World Echo 812 has been successfully reignited. It stated, its voice holding that same dispassionate tone, yet Izuku thought he could detect a hint of something new. A resonance. A satisfaction. The conceptual foundation has been laid. Life, in its own time, will follow. The archivist then turned its stellar gaze upon Izuku, its white dwarf eyes settling on his flickering arm. The process was a success. You gave it a foundation of connection, of selflessness, of hope. A fine start for a new story. But the cost was as predicted. It gestured to his arm. You gave it a fragment of your history, a piece of your emotional core. You are diminished. Izuku pushed himself into a sitting position, his movements slow and agonizing. Will it always be this hard? No, the archivist said, and for a moment, Izuku felt a surge of relief. Then the being continued. It will be harder. Each world is different. Each heart requires a different emotional key, a different piece of your soul. And with each piece you give away, you will have less of yourself to draw upon. The seed is finite, Izuku Midoriya. As are you. The archivator looked back towards the newly colored city. Celebrate this victory. You have created a new Genesis. You have proven it is possible, but know this, you have lit but one small flame on an infinite shore. And the ocean of darkness is vast. Izuku followed its gaze. He saw the new blue sky, felt the gentle hum of a world reborn. He had done it. It was real. The crushing loneliness of the void had been pushed back, if only in this one small corner of the graveyard. He felt the hollowness where his precious memories had been, a constant, painful reminder of the price. But he also felt the hum of the living city resonating within him, a fragile warmth that fought against the cold. He had lit the first candle in the dark, and he had paid for it with the oil of his own soul. And looking at the dawn he had just created, he knew, with a certainty that hurt, that he would do it again. The transition back to the Nexus was a jarring ascent from the quiet cradle of a newborn world into the sterile, timeless silence of the library. Izuku stumbled onto the obsidian floor, the hum of the restored reality a phantom echo in his ears. He felt the hollowness where his memories had been, a constant, dull ache in the center of his soul. His left arm still shimmered with a faint translucence, a physical manifestation of the price he had paid. He was exhausted on a level that transcended the physical. It was a weariness of the spirit, a deep-set fatigue from having a piece of his identity unwritten. He wanted to rest, to sleep for 1,000 years, but he knew he couldn't. The image of the graveyard of worlds, that infinite expanse of gray, was burned into his mind. One light was not enough. The archivist was waiting for him, its form of shifting starlight a constant, unmoving presence. It held a new book, this one bound in what looked like tarnished, weeping iron. Your first act of creation was a success. The cosmic being stated, its voice resonating in the vast chamber. You have demonstrated the capacity of the seed, but do not assume the formula will remain the same. The next echo is different. Izuku pushed himself to his feet, his body protesting. Different how? The last world was one of logic and connection. Its spirit was one of unity, though it had been silenced. It was a blank page, receptive to the story of hope you wrote upon it. The archivist explained, its stellar eyes fixed on the iron-bound book. This next one is not a blank page. It is a page that has been written, torn out, and trampled in the mud. Its foundational story is not one of hope, but of its deliberate and systematic extinguishment. The archivist gestured, and the portal to the void rippled open once more. But this time, the gray mist swirling within it seemed darker, colder. In this reality, the concept of hero was not one of salvation, but of subjugation. A single, godlike being, calling himself the sovereign, rose to power and united the world not through inspiration, but through absolute, crushing force. He eliminated all dissent, all conflict, all struggle, by eliminating free will. His peace was the peace of the perfectly ordered prison. Its spirit is one of despair. Its anthem is the rattling of chains. A chill that had nothing to do with the temperature of the nexus traced its way down Izuku's spine. So, what does that mean for me? For the seed, it means that the very concepts you used to ignite the last world, memories of triumphant victory, of heroic sacrifice, of inspiring hope, are poisoned there. In that reality, those ideas are synonymous with the tyrant who broke it. To offer it your heroism would be like trying to cure a disease with more of the same pathogen. It will not welcome the light. You will have to find a different key for a much rustier lock. Izuku looked from the archivist's unreadable face to the grim, swirling portal. He was already diminished, already aching. And now he had to walk into a world designed to reject the very core of his being. The heart of this world, the archivist said, its voice a final, solemn note, is the sovereign's throne. Steeling himself, Izuku nodded. There was no other choice. He took a breath, the memory of his friends a distant, factual echo, and stepped through the gate. The fall into this world was not silent. It was filled with a low, mournful, unending moan, like the sound of a distant, grieving wind. He landed on cold, cracked flagstones, and the first thing he felt was the rain. It was a miserable, gray drizzle that fell from a bruised, perpetually twilight sky of deep purple and charcoal black. But the rain was not wet. It was cold, and it beaded on his costume, but it carried no moisture. It was the idea of rain, the concept of sorrow made manifest, falling endlessly on a world that had forgotten how to feel. The architecture was a nightmare of Gothic oppression. Towers of black, jagged iron clawed at the bruised sky, their peaks adorned not with statues of angels, but with weeping, chained gargoyles. The buildings were monolithic, brittlest structures of dark, stained stone, their windows narrow slits like the eyes of suspicious guards. Great chains thick as a man's waist hung between the spires, not for support, but for symbolism. This was a city built to intimidate, to remind its inhabitants of their own insignificance. The very air was heavy, thick with a palpable despair that settled on his shoulders like a leaden cloak. It was a physical pressure that made it hard to breathe, that whispered of futility and failure directly into his mind. His vibrant green costume felt garish here, an obscenity against the muted, somber tones of the world. The faint, hopeful spark of the Genesis seed in his chest felt like a foreign body, something the world's immune system was already trying to reject. He looked down at his hands. The flickering translucence in his left arm was more pronounced here, the oppressive atmosphere making it harder for him to hold his own form together. Ninth, can you feel that? It was the second user's voice, grim and sharp. This place, it remembers being conquered. It respects only power. No, Nana Shimura countered, her voice soft but firm in his mind. It fears power. That is not the same as respect. That is a wound. Izuku began to walk, his boots making soft, soundless impacts on the slick gray stone. He needed to find the citadel, the seat of the sovereign's power. Like before, he tried to sense the conceptual void left by the world's heart. Here, it was not a clean hole, but a festering, jagged wound. The pull was unmistakable, a vortex of misery that drew him towards the city's center. The streets were lined with statues. Not of heroes saving people, but of the sovereign in various poses of domination. The sovereign with his foot on the neck of a crouched figure. The sovereign holding a broken sword, a symbol of defeated rebellion. The sovereign with one hand raised, demanding silence and obedience. His face, carved in stone, was handsome but utterly devoid of warmth, his eyes cold and severe. He wore ornate, militaristic armor, and on his chest was a symbol, a closed fist inside a perfect circle, the symbol of absolute control. The despair was a constant assault. It was in the weeping gargoyles, in the cold, wetless rain, in the oppressive architecture. It seeped into his thoughts, dredging up his deepest insecurities. You failed them. The thought was not his own, but it felt like it. It was the city whispering to him. You had all the power in the universe, and you couldn't save a single one. What makes you think you can save a world? Stop it, he muttered, shaking his head. You are a failure. A broken little boy playing God. You are no creator. You are just the last ghost, haunting a graveyard you helped make. I said stop, he grunted, focusing on the vestiges. Their presence was a small, warm fire against the encroaching cold. He passed a grand, desolate plaza. At its center was not a fountain, but a series of empty, rusted pillories and stocks. He could almost feel the phantom echoes of public shamings, of hope being systematically dismantled before a silent, terrified crowd. On the wall of a building, a massive, faded mural depicted the sovereign shielding a cowering populace from a storm of chaotic fire, the message clear: freedom is chaos. My control is your only salvation. The whispers grew louder in his mind. You think you offer hope? Your hope is a lie. It is a promise of pain. Of struggle. Look where their struggle got them. Silence. Your all might, your Bakugo. Their defiant screams ended in nothing. Only silence is eternal. He staggered, leaning against a cold stone wall, his head pounding. The despair was a potent poison. He felt his own hope, the very foundation of his being, starting to crack. Don't listen, kid, came the gruff voice of Daigoro Banjo. This place is a liar. It's a bully. It wants you to give up. Don't you dare give it the satisfaction. He's right, Yoichi added. Despair is a parasite. It feeds on your attention. Starve it. Focus on the goal. Focus on us. Drawing strength from their voices, Izuku pushed himself off the wall and continued his march. The whispers of the city became a dull, malicious drone in the back of his mind, but he refused to let them take root. He finally reached his destination. The sovereign citadel was not a building. It was a mountain of black iron and obsidian carved into the shape of a fortress. It rose from the center of the city like a cancer, a single, monolithic spire that seemed to pierce the weeping sky. The path leading to its great gate was lined with the statues of his most powerful generals, each one kneeling in eternal fealty. The gate, a colossal slab of iron etched with the sovereign's symbol, stood slightly ajar. Izuku slipped through the gap into a courtyard of unnerving symmetry and silence. At the far end, a grand staircase led up into the citadel proper. He ascended the stairs, each step taking him deeper into the heart of the world's pain. He entered the main hall, a place of chilling, cavernous emptiness. The ceilings were vaulted, held up by pillars carved in the image of broken figures, their faces locked in expressions of eternal agony. The only light came from the gray, bruised sky, filtered through towering stained glass windows that depicted the sovereign's victories. And there, at the far end of the hall, on a raised dais, was the throne. It was a monstrous thing. Forged not from gold or stone, but from the melted down and twisted weapons of the sovereign's enemies. Swords, spears, and axes were fused together in a jagged, chaotic tangle, their edges still seeming to carry a phantom sharpness. The seat was a cold slab of iron, the back rising in a fan of broken blades. It was a throne built not for comfort, but for a constant, sharp reminder of dominance. It radiated a cold that was palpable, a vortex of solidified despair and cruel triumph. This was the heart. Izuku walked the length of the great hall, the silence broken only by the mournful, ceaseless sigh of the wind outside. He stepped onto the dais, and stood before the throne of a dead god. The chill coming off it was so intense it made his teeth ache. Okay, he breathed, his vaporous breath a stark white against the gloom. Let's try this. He remembered the feeling from the ominous tower. He had to offer the world a story, a new theme to build upon. This world story was about a hero's victory leading to tyranny. He would show it a different kind of victory. A true hero's victory. He placed his hands on the icy, sharp metal of the throne's armrest. He closed his eyes and reached for a memory. He chose one of his proudest moments, his victory over Muscular, the feeling of pushing past his limits, of unleashing a 1,000,000% smash to protect a small, innocent child. The raw, triumphant power. The feeling of absolute, righteous victory over a monstrous evil. He poured the memory, with all its power and emotion, into the throne. The world screamed. The throne did not light up. It erupted in a wave of absolute cold. The metal beneath his hands frosted over, the ice spreading in black, spidery veins. The temperature in the hall plummeted. The mournful sigh of the wind outside rose to a piercing, agonized shriek. The shadows in the corners of the room deepened, coalescing, pulling away from the walls like thick, black tar. They began to take shape, forming twisted, vaguely humanoid figures with hollow eyes and silent, screaming mouths. Shades, the lingering psychic residue of the world's despair, given form and fury by his offering. His heroism was not healing this world. It was feeding its nightmares. What's happening? He cried out, pulling his hands back from the freezing metal. You're showing it what it already knows. The second user yelled in his mind. Power. Domination. The righteous victory. To this world, your memory of defeating Muscular is no different from the sovereign crushing a rebellion. You're just reinforcing the bars of its cage. The shades of despair began to drift towards him, their silent screams echoing in his soul. They were intangible, but the aura of hopelessness they radiated was a potent weapon. He felt his strength leaving him, his will to fight dissolving in the face of their collective misery. He was failing. The whispers returned, louder now, a chorus from the shades. See? Your power is a curse. Your victories are just prelude to pain. You are no savior. You are just another conqueror. He stumbled back, falling to one knee. The cold was overwhelming. The despair was absolute. Maybe they were right. What was he doing? He was a child, trying to repaint the universe with a broken set of crayons. He was arrogant. He was a fool. It was over. He couldn't do it. And then, he felt a gentle warmth spread through his chest. It was a soft, steady glow that pushed back against the encroaching cold. In the mindscape of One for All, Nana Shimura stepped forward, her form of brilliant white light a stark contrast to the despairing gloom of the throne room. The other vestiges remained seated, watching her with solemn respect. She knelt before him in his mind, her expression one of profound empathy. Izuku. Look at me. He looked up, his mental form trembling. You cannot fight this world. You cannot conquer it. It has already been conquered, and it broke its spirit. You can't defeat darkness by simply shining a brighter, more triumphant light. All that does is create harsher shadows. She reached out, her hand of light touching his cheek. You have to light a candle within the darkness. Something small. Something quiet. Something that does not seek to vanquish the dark, but merely to exist within it. I don't understand, he whispered, his hope almost gone. What do I have that can do that? All my heroism is based on fighting, on winning. No, it's not, she said softly. The greatest acts of heroism are not always victories. Sometimes they are sacrifices. Sometimes they are acts of love so fierce they are willing to accept loss. Her eyes, glowing pools of soft light, grew distant, filled with an ancient, personal sorrow. I am going to give you a memory, Izuku. Not one of my victories. Not a memory of my time as a hero. I'm going to give you my greatest failure. And my most profound act of love. He felt a sudden, sharp influx of emotion. It was not his own. It was a wave of pure, heart-wrenching maternal love, so powerful it was in agony. It was followed by a crushing, soul-deep terror and a grief that felt like a part of her was being torn away. He saw what she saw. A small boy with dark hair, crying in a sterile, impersonal room. Her son. Kotaro. He felt her desperate, overwhelming need to hold him, to protect him, to keep him safe from a world of villains and a grandfather who was the incarnation of evil. She knew that her presence, her life as a hero, was a danger to him. All for one would find him through her. To protect him, she had to leave him. He felt her hand tremble as she reached for the door. He felt the sob catch in her throat as she walked away, every instinct in her body screaming at her to turn back. He felt the shattering of her own heart as she chose her son's safety over her own happiness. She was not winning a fight. She was not defeating a villain. She was surrendering. She was accepting a personal, permanent defeat to grant her child a chance at peace. It was an act of pure, untainted, selfless sacrifice, born not of a desire for glory, but from the depths of a mother's love. The memory flowed into him, and Izuku wept. Not for himself, but for her. He felt her pain as if it were his own. It was a beautiful, terrible, holy thing. The shades in the throne room faltered, their advance slowing. They seemed confused by this new emotion radiating from him. It was not the arrogant fire of triumph they had expected. It was a quiet, gentle warmth. A sorrow. A grace. He understood. Slowly, painfully, Izuku got to his feet. He turned back to the throne, the personification of this world's pain. The shades watched him, their forms wavering. He walked back to the dais, the memory of Nana's sacrifice a living, breathing thing inside him. He did not place his hands upon the throne this time. He did not try to force his will upon it. Instead, he simply stood before it and gently touched 2 fingers to the central, jagged blade. He didn't push. He offered. He let the memory of Nana's sacrifice flow from him. He didn't give the world the story of a hero winning. He gave it the story of a mother losing, and in that loss, performing an act of love more profound than any victory. He offered it not a solution to its despair, but a companion to it. He showed it that there could be beauty in sorrow, strength in sacrifice, and love in loss. For a long moment, nothing happened. The throne remained cold and black. The shades remained silent. The whispers of the city held their breath. Then, a single, clear, musical note chimed in the vast hall. A single crack appeared on the throne's icy surface. From the crack, a single drop of pure, clear water welled up and fell, like a tear, onto the dais below. The change was not explosive, but gentle. The oppressive cold in the room did not vanish, but it lessened, losing its malicious bite. The throne began to glow, not with a triumphant blue, but with a soft, gentle, silver light, like moonlight on water. The jagged, melted weapons that formed it seemed to soften, their sharp edges blurring. The shades of despair did not flee or dissipate. They simply stopped screaming. Their twisted forms straightened, and they turned their hollow eyes not on Izuku, but on the glowing throne. They seemed to be listening, not to a command, but to a lullaby. One by one, they dissolved, not into nothingness, but into a soft, silver mist that drifted towards the throne and was absorbed by its gentle light. A wave of silver energy pulsed outwards from the citadel, far softer than the blue wave of the previous world. As the light washed over the city, the world began to change. The bruised, purple sky did not turn blue. It softened into a deep, peaceful indigo, like the sky just after sunset. A few, faint silver stars began to glitter in the twilight. The oppressive, wetless rain did not stop, but it transformed. The gray drizzle became a gentle, cleansing shower of silver motes of light that hissed softly where they touched the stone, washing away the grime of ages. The black iron towers did not change their shape, but their color softened to a deep, regal purple. The weeping gargoyles still wept, but their expressions were now of catharsis, not agony. The chains that hung between the buildings remained, but they now seemed less like symbols of oppression and more like melancholic decoration. Color returned, but in a palette of somber, beautiful tones. Deep blues, rich purples, shimmering silvers, and soft lavenders. The world was still sad. It was still melancholic. But it was no longer hopeless. Its despair had been given a context, a sense of peace. It was a world that had learned to cry, and in doing so, had begun to heal. The sound that returned was not a symphony of technology. It was the sound of a single, mournful cello, its long, sad notes weaving through the cleansed air, accompanied by the soft, distant sound of a heavenly choir. It was a song of beautiful sadness. Izuku stood in the throne room, watching the transformation. He felt Nana Shimura's grief and love settled permanently in his heart, a new, bittersweet layer to his soul. It was a heavy weight, but it was also a strange comfort. He hadn't lost a memory this time. He had gained a sorrow. The archivist materialized at the entrance to the hall, its starry form observing the new, melancholic world. Remarkable, it said, and this time the word was tinged with something that sounded almost like admiration. You did not erase its sorrow. You gave it the grace to endure it, a far more difficult, and far more meaningful, act of creation. Izuku looked at his hands. His left arm was still translucent, but it seemed more stable now. He was learning. He was adapting. The cost was immense, but the results were beautiful. Not every world is saved by a victory, he said aloud, the lesson settling deep within him. Indeed, the archivist replied. Some are saved by an act of kindness. Some by a shared grief. Some by a defiant laugh in the face of oblivion. Each is a unique story. Each will demand a different piece of you. Izuku looked out through the grand entrance of the hall at the city of twilight and silver rain. He had not conquered its despair. He had simply given it hope's quiet, gentle cousin, the strength to endure. And in this world born from a mother's sacrifice, that was more than enough. It was a start. After the beautiful, somber twilight of the second world, the third was a staggering, life-affirming shock. It was a symphony of green and gold. Izuku emerged from the portal not onto cold stone or sterile asphalt, but onto a soft, yielding carpet of moss that glowed with a faint, internal bioluminescence. The air was warm and humid, thick with the scent of damp earth, night-blooming flowers, and the clean, electric tang of petrichor from a rain that had long since passed. This was a world that had not been paved over or built upon, but had been grown. The buildings were colossal, living trees, their trunks as wide as ancient temples, their bark intricately woven with glowing vines that served as pathways and bridges between the high canopies. Great, luminous flowers pulsed with gentle light, illuminating the forest floor, and the sky above was a clear, stardusted velvet, unobscured by smog or fractured reality. Even in its gray, silent state, the world's potential for life was overwhelming. The shapes were organic, flowing, and harmonious. It was a world that had chosen symbiosis over conquest, growth over construction. A profound, sleeping peace resided here, a stark and welcome contrast to the oppressive despair of the sovereign's world. Izuku took a moment just to breathe, to let the ghost of this world's tranquility wash over him. His own form felt more stable here, the natural vitality of the place seeming to reinforce his own existence. The translucent quality of his left arm was still there, a permanent scar, but it seemed less pronounced, less fragile. He felt the weight of Nana Shimura's sorrow in his soul, a constant, bittersweet companion, but here, in this cradle of life, it felt less like a burden and more like a quiet, sacred memory. It's beautiful, Nana's voice whispered in his mind, tinged with a sense of wonder. They lived in peace. With the world, and with each other. No standing armies. No weapons of mass destruction. Their technology is biological, integrated, the second user observed, his tone less of a warrior's analysis and more of a grudging, academic respect. A formidable, yet peaceful, society. The pull of the heart was not a void or a wound here. It was a gentle, magnetic thrum, like the steady, deep beat of a colossal drum. It drew him deeper into the forest, along glowing vine paths that seemed to brighten slightly as he approached, as if sensing the life within him. He followed the thrum for what felt like miles, moving through a silent, breathtaking landscape of giant ferns, luminous mushroom groves, and rivers whose beds were lined with softly glowing pebbles. The silence here was not oppressive, like in the other worlds. It was a peaceful, reverent silence, the silence of a cathedral awaiting the first note of a hymn. He finally arrived at the source of the thrumming. It was a clearing, vast and circular, and in its center grew a tree that beggared belief. Its trunk was a mountain of living wood, so wide it would take 100 people holding hands to encircle it. The bark was a mosaic of 1,000 shades of green and brown, with rivers of golden sap flowing in intricate, glowing patterns along its surface. Its branches, thick as buildings themselves, spread out to create a canopy that was a world unto itself, blotting out the stars and creating a sacred space below. From these branches hung great, bell-shaped, luminescent flowers, each the size of a small car, their gentle, golden light illuminating the clearing. This was not just a tree. It was the biological and spiritual nexus of the entire planet. This was the heartwood. Izuku approached it with a sense of profound reverence. This was not a machine to be activated or a throne to be cleansed. This was a living thing, sleeping, waiting. He reached the base of the trunk and placed his palm against the warm, slightly yielding bark. The thrumming synced with his own heartbeat, a deep, resonant thump-thump that was the pulse of a dormant world. "What memory does a world like this need?" he asked the vestiges, his voice a soft whisper. "Not one of struggle," Yoichi answered, his voice calm and contemplative. "Not one of sacrifice or sorrow. It doesn't need to be taught a lesson. It simply needs to be reminded of what it is. It needs a memory of simple, quiet growth. Of peace. Of life for its own sake." Izuku searched his soul. His memories of triumph were for the first world. His newfound sorrow was for the second. What did he have left? The emotional wellspring from which he drew was becoming shallower, the cost of his creationism leaving him with fewer and fewer pure, potent memories. He sifted through the archives of his past the grand battles and the defining moments of his heroic career. He settled on something small, simple, yet foundational. A memory from long before Yue, before All Might, before he even dared to dream. He was a little boy, no older than 5, kneeling in the small garden behind his apartment building with his mother. The sun was warm on his back. He remembered the smell of the rich soil, the feel of it cool and crumbly in his small hands. He remembered his mother, her smile so gentle and patient, showing him how to place a tiny, insignificant-looking seed into the earth. He remembered watering it every day, the breathless anticipation, and then, the overwhelming, magical joy of seeing the first tiny, green shoot push its way out of the ground. It wasn't a heroic memory. It wasn't world-changing. But it was a memory of creation. Of nurturing life. Of the quiet, profound miracle of growth. It was the perfect offering. He pressed his hand more firmly against the heartwood. He closed his eyes and let the memory flow, not as a torrent, but as a gentle spring. He gave the great tree the feeling of the warm sun, the smell of the soil, the patient love of his mother, and the simple, pure joy of seeing a new life begin. The memory left him with a faint, nostalgic ache, a feeling of a photograph fading to sepia. It was a small price, but it was still a price. The heartwood responded instantly. A soft, golden light began to glow from beneath its bark, tracing the patterns of the sap rivers. The low thrumming in his chest intensified, becoming a deep, resonant hum that vibrated through the very air. The great, bell-shaped flowers hanging from the canopy began to glow brighter, their golden light intensifying, washing the clearing in the warm tones of a perfect sunrise. The hymn had begun. A wave of life energy, pure and golden, pulsed outward from the heartwood. It was a gentle, nurturing wave, and as it spread, it woke the world from its gray slumber. The moss at his feet erupted in a vibrant, glowing emerald. The trees of the forest regained their rich, deep greens and browns. The silent rivers began to flow, their glowing pebbles creating shimmering, dancing patterns of light in the water. And then came the sound. It was not the hum of machines or the sorrow of a cello. It was the sound of the world itself. The rustle of a billion leaves in a new wind, the gentle chime of the bellflowers swaying. The chirps, clicks, and songs of countless insects and unseen creatures stirring in the undergrowth. A symphony of life, intricate and overwhelming, rose to greet the new dawn. Izuku felt a profound sense of satisfaction, a creator's joy that momentarily overshadowed the ache of his own diminishing self. He had done it. He had brought back a paradise. He was so engrossed in the miracle of rebirth, so lost in the swelling chorus of a world returning to life, that he didn't notice it at first. A discordant note in the symphony, a single point in the vibrant clearing where the color was wrong. The moss in one spot was not a vibrant green, but a dull, sickly gray. The golden light of the heartwood seemed to bend around this spot, refusing to touch it. And then, the anti-sound began. It was the opposite of the world's symphony, a focused, localized silence that began to eat the noise around it. The chirping of insects, the rustle of leaves, it all just stopped as it reached the edge of this growing circle of wrongness. From the center of that silent, gray patch, something began to rise. It wasn't a creature of flesh and bone, or even of shadow and light. It was a tear in the fabric of the world, a human-shaped hole in reality. It had the vague, tall silhouette of All for One, but it was made of visual static, a roiling, chaotic scramble of pure nothingness. Its presence was an active negation. The air around it grew cold and sterile. The rich, loamy scent of the forest was replaced by an aseptic, clinical emptiness. This was a shade of Nexus All for One. It had no eyes, but Izuku felt its attention lock onto him. It was not looking at him. It was looking through him, at the bright, defiant spark of the Genesis seed in his chest. It was a predator that had scented the warmth of life in its cold, empty domain. Ninth. The second user's voice was a blade in his mind. Get away from the tree. That thing is an eraser. It's drawn to what you're doing. Izuku didn't need to be told twice. He pushed off the heartwood, a jolt of adrenaline cutting through his exhaustion. As he leaped back, the shade moved. It didn't run, it simply flowed across the ground, a river of non-existence that left a trail of dead, gray moss in its wake. It raised an arm, a limb of pure static, and a beam of utter blackness shot forth. It wasn't a laser of energy. It was a projected line of erasure. It moved with impossible speed, aimed not at Izuku, but at the base of the heartwood. Instinct took over. Izuku, mid-air, activated Float and Black Whip, changing his trajectory in a wild, impossible arc. He landed between the beam and the tree, every fiber of his being screaming that he had to protect this nascent world. There was no time to dodge. The beam of nothingness was upon him. In that split second, a primal fear seized him, but something else rose to meet it. He was not just Izuku Midoriya anymore. He was the vessel for the hope of three worlds. And they answered his silent call. From his core, a faint, translucent shield of hard, blue light flickered into existence before him. The echo of the omnious, the logical, ordered defense of a world of technology. The erasure beam struck the shield, and instead of passing through, it was refracted, scattering into harmless slivers of nothing that dissolved into the air. The shield held for a bare second before shattering like glass. At the same time, a silver mist, imbued with a profound sorrow, rose from the ground around him, the echo of the sovereign's world. It swirled around his body, a cloak of beautiful sadness. The oppressive, nihilistic aura of the shade washed over him, but instead of crippling him with despair, it was absorbed by the mist, neutralized by a grief far older and deeper than its empty philosophy. He landed on his feet, shaken but unharmed, a new, staggering realization dawning on him. The worlds he had restored, they weren't just distant lights anymore. They were a part of him. Their essences were woven into his soul, and they would fight to protect their creator. The shade paused, its static form seeming to tilt its head in confusion. It had expected a simple kill. It had found a complex reality. So, Izuku said, his voice low and steady, green lightning beginning to crackle around his body, a stark contrast to the blue and silver energies swirling around him. Nafo knows I'm here. He sent a dog to hunt me. The shade didn't reply with words. It replied with an attack. The very ground beneath Izuku's feet was suddenly unmade. He was falling into a pit of gray nothingness. But he was ready. He pushed off with Float, soaring into the air as black whip tendrils, glowing with a faint golden light from the heartwood, shot out and anchored him to the colossal tree branches above. You want to fight with concepts? Izuku roared, a surge of defiant energy rising within him. Let's fight with concepts. He pulled himself into the canopy, landing on a branch as thick as a highway. The shade simply dissolved its form on the ground and reformed on the branch opposite him, the wood turning gray and brittle where it manifested. Its existence is a paradox, Joichi's voice analyzed calmly in his mind. It is a being made of non-being. You cannot destroy it with force, because force is a property of existence. To hit it is like trying to punch a hole in a hole. So how do I fight it? Izuku asked, his eyes never leaving the shimmering static of the creature. You cannot fill the hole, Yoichi replied. But you can remind it that it is a hole in something much, much bigger. You cannot attack it with existence. You must overwhelm it with existence. Izuku understood. He couldn't just punch it. He had to make his very punch a fundamental declaration of reality. The shade lunged, its form blurring. It didn't just move fast, it seemed to delete the space between them. It thrust a hand of static toward Izuku's chest, aiming for the Genesis seed. Izuku met the attack not with a block, but with a punch. Detroit smash! He focused not just the physical power of One for All, but its conceptual weight. He poured the defiant will of 9 heroes, the nascent life of the forest world, the logical order of the tech world, and the enduring sorrow of the gothic world into his fist. When his fist connected with the Shade's hand, there was no sound of impact. There was a deafening crack in the silence of reality. A shockwave of pure, unadulterated being erupted from the point of contact. The Shade was hurled backward, its form flickering violently, not from damage, but from the sheer ontological shock of being struck by something so fundamentally real. It was like trying to contain a supernova in a paper cup. It slammed into the trunk of the hardwood, and the ancient tree groaned, its golden light flaring as it fought off the corrupting touch of the void. The Shade recoiled as if burned, the pure life energy of the tree anathema to it. Izuku pressed his advantage. He was a whirlwind of green, blue, and silver light, his smashes not just breaking the sound barrier, but breaking the barrier between what was and what wasn't. Each blow was a statement. I am here. This world is here. The Shade was a terrifying opponent. It adapted. It sent out waves of erasure that forced him to constantly reinforce his reality with the echoes of the restored worlds. It tried to unmake the branch he was standing on, forcing him to use Black Whip to swing through the air. It whispered Nefo's philosophy into his mind, a siren song of nihilism. All this struggle, for what? A brief flicker of light and noise before the inevitable silence. Peace is unity. Unity is one. Let go. Join the perfection of the single consciousness. My friends didn't die for silence! Izuku roared, unleashing a volley of St. Louis smashes, each kick a resounding affirmation of choice, a beautiful, messy, chaotic life. The fight was surreal. A dance between a being of pure vibrant reality and a creature of absolute nothingness, staged in the branches of a world tree, under the gaze of 1,000 silent, glowing flowers. Izuku knew he was winning, but he was also fading. Every conceptual smash, every shield of blue light, every cloak of silver mist, drained him. His own form was flickering more and more, the translucence spreading up his arm to his shoulder. He was burning his own existence as fuel. He needed to end it. He saw his chance. He goaded the Shade towards a part of the canopy away from the main trunk. Then, he put everything into a final, desperate gambit. He charged forward, straight at the creature, feinting a massive punch. The Shade responded as he knew it would, its form becoming more diffuse, ready to let the physical attack pass through it while it lunged for his core. But he wasn't aiming for a punch. At the last second, he opened his hands. Black Whip, World Soul Cage. It wasn't just his Black Whip that erupted from his arms. Tendrils of blue, technological light and shimmering, silver mist shot out alongside the familiar black energy, all of it supercharged by the golden vitality of the heartwood. The tendrils did not try to hit the Shade. They wrapped around it, forming a sphere, a cage woven from the conceptual essences of 3 different realities. The Shade was trapped. For the first time, its static form convulsed in what looked like panic. It was surrounded, not by matter, but by concepts that were fundamentally hostile to its nature. The logic of the blue tendrils defined its boundaries. The sorrow of the silver mist gave its emptiness a painful weight. The life of the golden black whips filled its void with an agonizing vibrancy. It was trapped, and Izuku was connected to it. And in that moment of connection, their minds touched. His consciousness was ripped from the heartwood and plunged into an abyss. He was floating in an infinite, cold void, but he was not alone. Before him was a consciousness of unimaginable scale, Nexus all for one. He didn't see a man in a suit. He saw a galaxy of stolen thoughts, a universe of consumed feelings. And at its very center, he felt the original spark, a single, terrified, lonely man. He was shown a vision. He saw Nefo, long ago, standing at the precipice of his own conquered reality. He had achieved everything. He was a god. And he had never been more alone. He reached out into the multiverse, not for conquest at first, but for connection, for a peer. But all he found was noise. An infinite, screaming cacophony of life. Billions of worlds, each with its own cycle of birth, struggle, pain, and death. He saw love curdle into hate. He saw hope crushed by despair. He saw civilizations rise only to fall. He saw heroes die for causes that were forgotten a generation later. He saw an endless, meaningless, painful churn, and the lonely god came to a terrible, logical conclusion. The problem was not the pain or the struggle. The problem was the plurality, the chaos of infinite, separate wills, each pursuing its own selfish, fleeting story. The only way to end the suffering was to end the stories, to gather all the threads, all the consciousness, all the pain and joy, into one, single, unified, silent being. Himself. It wasn't an act of malice. In his own twisted, cosmic mind, it was an act of ultimate mercy. He was not a destroyer. He was a savior, rescuing existence from itself. Can you not see the beauty of it? Nefo's true voice echoed in Izuku's mind. It was not a chorus of the dead. It was a single voice, calm, rational, and filled with a profound cosmic weariness. One mind, one story. One perfect, unchanging eternity. No more loss. No more grief. Only peace. The vision was so powerful, so horribly persuasive, that for a terrifying moment, Izuku felt himself agree. But then, he saw their faces. Uraraka's, fading to dust but reaching for him. Bakugo's, burning with defiant life in his final second. All Might's, smiling in the face of oblivion. Their lives had been filled with pain and struggle. But they had also been filled with love and choice, and a fierce, beautiful, imperfect glory. Nefo's peace was a lie. It was the ultimate tyranny. Your peace is a prison! Izuku screamed into the mental void. The connection shattered. He was back in the heartwood, the shade thrashing within his multicolored cage. He now understood his enemy. And he knew how to defeat its echo. He couldn't just overwhelm it with existence. He had to show it the value of separate existences. Trinity smash! He didn't punch the cage. He pushed. He poured the last of his usable energy into the conceptual weave. He forced the three disparate essences, logic, sorrow, and life, not to attack the shade, but to flood into it, to try and coexist inside its emptiness. The shade was a being of unity, a fragment of a single, monolithic mind. The act of containing three separate, powerful, and complete universal concepts at once was something it was fundamentally incapable of doing. Its static form began to break apart, unable to reconcile the conflicting realities within it. The logical blue, the emotional silver, and the vibrant gold warred within its non-form. It was being given a soul, three souls, and the process was tearing it apart. With a final, silent scream that was a wave of pure ontological chaos, the shade of Nexus All for One imploded. It didn't explode outward. It collapsed inward on itself, unable to contain the beautiful, chaotic contradiction of life. It winked out of existence, leaving behind nothing but the memory of a chill and a faint scent of ozone. Izuku's strength gave out completely. The black whip cage dissolved. He fell from the branch, his body a leaden weight, his consciousness flickering. He was caught by a newly formed net of soft, glowing vines from the heartwood before he hit the ground. He lay there, panting, his form so translucent he was practically a ghost. The world around him was healing. The gray scars left by the shade were being overgrown by vibrant green moss. The symphony of life, which had faltered, returned, stronger and more defiant than before. The world was alive. He had saved it. But the victory felt cold. The archivist appeared, standing beside the vine cradle, its form a cascade of silent, distant stars. You have survived your first test, it stated. Its voice was, as always, neutral, but the words themselves were heavy. And you have learned a valuable and terrible truth. Izuku knew what it was. He knows about me, he whispered, his voice barely audible. He knows I'm here. He knows what I can do, indeed, the archivist confirmed. The shade was a probe. A hunter-killer sent to investigate the strange light of creation in its silent domain. By destroying it, you have sent a definitive signal back to its master. You have announced your presence. You have declared war. Izuku closed his eyes, the sheer weight of his new reality settling upon him. Before, he was a gardener, working in secret to plant new seeds in a forgotten field. Now, he was a rebel, a single flickering candle in a hurricane, and the storm had turned its full attention upon him. He was no longer just the hunter of lost hearts. He was now the hunted. And the game had just begun.